Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are the Branham Alumni Network, which is an organization. Well, we're the official alumni network of Branham High School, and our goal is to help high school students learn how to navigate high school and also prepare for life after that, whether that's college or a diverse other pathway. And so, yeah, and I'm just going to introduce myself, and then Shamian and Kylie will do the same. So I'm Lauren. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I graduated Branham in 2019. And we have a person joining us. I graduated Branham in 2019, and I currently attend Georgetown University, where I'm a junior majoring in women and gender studies. And one thing that I'm doing in college that's kind of cool is that I'm a student activist. And so this past year, I launched a petition against my university, and we were able to garner over 600 signatures. And so that was very exciting and fun.
Good.
Go ahead,
Hi.
Kylie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, I'm Kylie Delaney. I graduated from Branham High School in 2019 as well. I'm currently attending UC Santa Barbara, and I'm also a junior. I'm double majoring in statistics and data science and communication. And then one thing I think is kind of cool that I'm getting to do at my university is research with a professor. So I've gotten really close with her and just kind of learning about research and that entire process. So yeah.
And then, hi, I'm Xiaomian. I graduated from Branham last year, so class of 2020. I currently go to Stanford, and I'm a rising sophomore. So I am intending to major in material science and engineering, specifically around the renewable energy track, also maybe minor in CS. And something I've done in college that's pretty cool is the first quarter I was in Stanford. I was remote, but I participated in this entrepreneurship camp. And so my team and I basically brainstormed, basically came up with a company that helps people take care and organize your prescription medicines. And we won first place. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Awesome. And I forgot to reiterate in the beginning, but the reason why we wanted to have this webinar is because college is very, very different than high school in many ways. And so we know that that can be exciting, but also a little bit scary. And so Shamian, Kylie, and I just wanted to shine some light into what college is like, and so give some tips on how to navigate that difficult transition. And so if you're going into high school or going into college next year, this will be helpful to you, but also for current Branham students who are just interested in learning about college and the different types of colleges that are available to you. I think this will be a really awesome and fruitful experience. So thank you so much. So we're going to have some pre-made questions that we're going to go over, and then we'll have a Q&A section at the end where you can ask us questions. So if you think of any throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll address them later. But if you have a specific question about what we're talking about in that moment, feel free to also ask clarifying questions, and we can provide more details.
Okay, so we will start with some questions. We're going to start with academics and then move on to social life and how to balance the two. So our first question is actually, how should I look for classes in college? As you start your freshman year of college, how many should freshmen take? How should we look for credits and that kind of things? Because we all know like college classes are in general more free for you to pick from rather than these 10 classes in which you're picking from in high school. So how in general should we be looking for college classes?
All right, so UCSB is a relatively large school. I think there's around 36,000 students. So you are in classes with upwards to 900 students. I think my smallest class was maybe 75. But with that being said, there is a limited number of seats available that everyone's kind of gunning for. So it's somewhat difficult to actually get the classes you want. I came in undeclared to UCSB, which made it extra fun because some classes have restrictions that you kind of need to be aware of, and that you need to meet in order to be eligible to take the class. So some advice I would say when you're beginning your class search, kind of figure out the areas you kind of want to focus on, general education, majors, such like that, and look at the requirements for that. What does it entail for you to be eligible to be in those classes? And kind of create your list of all of the possibilities that you could take. Once you kind of have your main list, I would just strongly suggest creating multiple backup plans just in case, because everyone is just like you, looking for those spots, wanting to get into the similar classes and all of that. So making sure that you are prepared for all sorts of situations. Normally what I'll do, I'll FaceTime one of my best friends and we'll have our list together. I'll sign in when she's supposed to sign into classes, and same with me. And we'll just look at what we can kind of get into to maximize our ability to get the classes that we need for our major in general education.
Yeah, and going more into depth about that. So in high school, there's a very limited amount of classes that you can take, but in college, there's a whole lot more options to choose from. So when you're looking, definitely look to see if there are any general education requirements that you have to complete. Some colleges have very little general education requirements and others have a lot. If you took AP classes in college or in high school, then in college, sometimes you can get out of those general education requirements. So like for me, I took AP Lang and AP Lit, so I didn't have to take any writing course in college. And I also didn't have to take any math courses, which was great. So keep that in mind. And also for your major requirements, sometimes, well, like for me at Georgetown, you go in undeclared and then you declare your sophomore year. And so it's a little different from Kylie's experience. But because I had that freedom to be undeclared, I got to try classes in different areas. So I took like an introduction to cultural anthropology course, didn't like that a ton, took an intro to women and gender studies class, loved it, and decided to major in it. So look at the different major requirements for the majors that you're interested in, and maybe take the introductory courses or some of the easier courses in those majors if you're going in undeclared. And that's helpful. Also, within your general education and major requirements, there's a lot of flexibility. And so oftentimes you can really pursue your passions and interests within your classes. So for example, I had to take a science course for my general education requirement, and I ended up taking physics for future leaders, which had no math required, and it was all about like energy policy and climate change and all of these things that I found really interesting. So even though it was a science course, I didn't find it boring at all. I loved it. So yeah, you can find classes that fulfill your requirements and also are very fun. And then in terms of trying to find a course, oftentimes professors, they are really amazing at research, but they're not always the best teachers. And so Rate My Professor is really great. You can read like student testimonials about different courses, and you can see whether or not students, found their class fun, but it was an easier course, or they hated it and it was really hard and the teacher wasn't interesting. You can get lots of different student testimonials. Always take it with a grain of salt, but that's helpful. And then there's also Coursical, which like Kylie mentioned, if your classes are very competitive to get into, it's nice to create lots of different schedules. And when you're picking courses, you have to think about the date and the time. And so sometimes courses overlap, and so you can't take them in the same semester. And so it's nice to be able to have it all laid out on a calendar so you can visualize what classes work together. And so Coursical is great for that.
Yeah, and so Kylie mentioned about taking care of general ed classes, especially in large public schools. It's really hard to get the classes you want, so have a backup plan when you are picking classes. And Laura mentioned like several websites are super helpful in which you can discover whether the professor is a good teacher and whether his class is interesting. Or you can start planning out your schedule or for your plan with some cool tools. And so I also want to mention maybe answering the questions more towards how many units should you really be taking as a freshman, and how do you really discover that? Because as a high school student, I knew that I took 6 classes per year, and that's that. Like, I didn't have to pick how many classes I'm taking or how rigorous, or consider how rigorous these classes are. And so for that, I would really recommend before you start picking classes, check out the advisory page for your college. And so that could be like a quick handbook website, or just checking your emails to see if your academic advisors, or if anyone like that, send an email about how you can pick classes, because in general, advisors are very open to sending resources that way. And oftentimes I realize my friends don't check their emails, which is why they don't know a lot of the things. And so I always check my emails. And so I got to know a lot about how classes are and the rigor and things like that. And so for Stanford in particular, our unit system is that 1 unit counts for 3 hours per week. And that's like including lectures. And so for advisors, they would recommend take 15 units when you start your college, because you want to account for the time you're going to be spending adapting to a new environment and being on your own. And so that's a really helpful advice. And so definitely check out these websites. And the second thing I would recommend is check how rigorous these classes are. So for me, because I knew I was going to be remote in the fall, I picked 3 STEM classes. For a quarter system, that's actually a lot, because you're doing 3 PSETs per week, and usually PSETs take like, I don't know, 5 to 10 hours to complete. And so that's a little bit hard, but I knew that I was going to be remote, so I didn't have to work on anything else other than my classes, and so I did that. But for you, it may be different because you're actually going to a college campus. So perhaps if you're going in a STEM major, I recommend 2 STEM classes plus 1 general ed class around the humanities, and so that could help you balance. And yeah, so that's, I think, everything for this question. And so the next question is, how are college classes different from high school classes? And Kylie, would you like to start?
Okay, so as Xiaomian kind of mentioned, like in high school, you take the same 6 classes for the entire year. College, whether you're on semester or quarter, does not work in the same way. So if you're on the quarter system, you're going to take classes completely different than what are in your other 2 quarters. Like, you're only there for, at least Santa Barbara, it's 10 weeks. And then semester, it's longer than 10 weeks, but you're only doing it for that semester. There may be multiple classes in a series, but it's still different content. So it moves a lot faster in pace compared to some of your high school classes, which is something to be aware of also in terms of rigor. Like I also mentioned earlier, your class size is going to be a lot larger. Odds are you might not know everyone in your class. I sure know I did not. But another thing to sometimes keep in mind, I've had some classes that aren't always taught by a professor. You're going to get different levels of expertise. I've had professors, I've had grad students, I've had teaching assistants, everything kind of in between. And sometimes in that larger class size, you very much have to become an independent learner. So if something doesn't necessarily make sense to you, you kind of have to find your resources, your people in the class to really help hone in on the information that you're missing and make sure that you're still kind of getting the content necessary to be successful in that class. So especially in those large classes, it's nice to try to find sometimes a smaller group. At Santa Barbara, we have sections, which is like 25 people that meet once a week. And that can be a great resource for you to find a smaller group of people to kind of study with and get that content that you may be missing if you are. But yeah, definitely something to be aware of. Also, in large lecture halls, if you are going in person, don't be afraid of the front. It's not going to hurt you. In fact, I highly recommend it, because if you are blind like me, you are not going to be able to see anything on a chalkboard sitting in row 25. So don't be afraid of the front. Really take advantage. Know that you are there for your own education. So take the steps necessary to be successful in that manner, because you'll still have to work for it and will be expected to know the information regardless of the circumstances surrounding the class. So just something to be aware of, but it's also very fun.
Yeah, my experience is very different from Kylie's because I go to a medium size college. So there's only 7,000 students on campus. And so there were times where I only had maybe like 10 to 15 people in my class for seminars. And so in those settings, it's definitely different than being in a class of 25. You really have to do the readings because everyone is going to be expected to participate in the conversation. So it's very obvious if you skip the homework. But then I think it's also fun because you get to really create a connection with your professor and the other students and really delve into the material. And so it's a very fun and fulfilling experience, but also very different. And then since I'm a humanities major, oftentimes in my classes, they would just assign lots of readings and then there's no comprehension questions or the professor isn't giving you assignments to check whether or not you read these assignments. You're getting graded in participation points. And so you demonstrate your understanding of the material by talking in class and then also by writing essays. But yeah, so it's less busy work and more analysis, and that sort of format is a little different.
Yeah, and I would also like to add on for STEM classes because I took a ton of these, and so I recognize like from like just heads on like being in a STEM class, lectures are usually very dense. So for example, I'm in a quarter system like Kylie for UCSB, and so imagine like you're taking 6 classes, right, for a full year for high school. Now imagine you're crunching all these 6 classes in 2 months. And so that's a really like big time crunch, but in a way you're more efficient in learning the material. So for me, for example, for usually like a CS intro class, for example, you might have an hour lecture Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday, and the professor's just gonna keep on lecturing. They won't really stop for questions. And so if you have any, you have to go to office hours to really ask about it. And in fact, I feel like lectures are usually more towards you learning the material rather than like you being able to solve a type of question. Like in AP Physics, I realized that a lot of questions are just one single type with some number changes and you can like basically finish them. But for college, it's very different in that all these STEM classes are expecting you to be critically thinking about the problem, that you understand how the formulas are derived and how you're going to be using them. And so that's something that's very different. And I realized like pretty much soon, like all my professors are like literally big stars in their research area. And so like take the opportunity to like learn from them and ask them about their research. In actuality, they really love talking to students, even though they seem pretty intimidating. So yeah, don't be shy, just ask. And in addition, sometimes the TAs are a lot more helpful than the professors because they understand more from the student perspective. And sometimes they can explain better. So don't hesitate in going to office hours. Usually like for me, like a class of 60 people might only have 10 people going to office hours. And so some people are not really taking advantage of these opportunities, which is sad because it's very useful. And so I would really recommend that. All right. If you have any questions, remember you can always send in a chat. But if not, we're going to be moving on to the next question. So our next question is, how do I thrive in a college class? And so more specifically, like, how do I take notes?
Okay, so for me, a lot of my thriving in my college classes has been the result of study groups because It's a smaller, intimate setting to collaborate with your peers who are in a similar situation as you. So you get to cross collaborate, get information you may have missed in a lecture, see it from a different perspective. Also an extremely bonding experience. I remember my first math class I took my fall quarter. All of us would study for all of the tests together. We would compare our study sheets, all of that. And we all ended up doing really well in the class because of the way we were able to collaborate and gain knowledge from each other. Even in an online setting, if you do happen to have online classes, I've gotten on Zoom calls and just worked on projects with people, shared information, done even quick calls for clarification. And it is always very helpful because seeing things from someone else's perspective can be very enlightening and beneficial for your own knowledge as well. For me also, my note taking really got honed in. I have two very different majors. One is definitely more humanities and the other one is very much STEM. And my note taking changes based on the courses I'm taking. All of my STEM classes are a lot more structured, but even in those, I do kind of 3 stages of note taking, regardless of the style. I'll always do like the initial, you're in lecture, listening to your professor, looking at slides, all of that, picking out key formulas or statements, ideas, things like that. After, I always would go through with afters, and like 30 minutes after I sat, let it sink in a little bit, going back, highlighting some things that kind of stick out. But then right before any tests where like sections are there, I would make master sheets of all of my notes and information, really taking those key points. So it's multiple cycles of your brain revisiting that information and getting exposure to it. And each time kind of elaborating further into that information. So it's very in there. Also just practicing memory recall, seeing how you can connect ideas from your lectures to your own life. I was telling Lauren and Xiaomian, I have a lot of inside jokes in my notes where I'll take things from the lecture and be like, oh, this is like that time you did this or had this experience. And it's nice because you're relating it to yourself and it helps a lot with that recall. But I developed this kind of system for taking notes because it was so helpful for me to kind of go back to information and make it interesting. And help me just learn it and feel more comfortable and confident with that material. And then also taking it to study groups, so twofold.
Yeah, going off of what Kylie was talking about, definitely at least for Georgetown, our humanities classes, you oftentimes have a whole bunch of reading assigned. So it's like 50 to 100 pages, maybe more of reading per class. And so when you go into your class, the professor doesn't expect you to memorize every single detail of what the author was trying to say. And so my notes look very different than they did in high school because for the most part, I just write a summary of what the author's main point was. And then I focus on how I reacted to the text and really write about that in my notes. And so if I have connections to what's going on in the world around me or what's going on in my life, I'll write those down. If I have questions about the text, I'll write those down. And so I'm interacting with the text and analyzing it. And that's the type of stuff that we'll talk about in class. And so then I have things to say when they call, when you need participation points. And then also when you're writing essays, you could just look back on, what you were thinking about when you were reading these texts, and then you have all of that information available to you, and it's much easier to write. And also, the format of essays are oftentimes different than in high school. Each professor has a different way that they want you to write oftentimes, and so if you are having trouble figuring out the writing style that your professor wants you to write in, it's great to just go to their office hours. I took an English class, and the professor, he didn't really like my essay, and so I got a B on the first one. And so then I emailed him and asked him, can we go over my essay and talk about how I can make it better? And so I went to his office hours, and then he, told me that I was just structuring it in a different way. So in high school, lit classes, they want you to structure it in a certain way, and in college, that way doesn't really fly. And so just figuring out what the professor wants. And even in terms of like their tests, sometimes professors and the TAs will host like, you know, a study session, and they give you sometimes like the questions and the topics that you need to study for, like word for word. And so the professors are really there to support you, but they have a certain way that they want you to memorize the information and interpret it. So just ask them, and they're there for you.
Yeah, I really don't have much to add on because my note taking during the Zoom ages has been cropping professor slides and then writing notes on it, which I find was very helpful because it saves a lot of time. And for me, like I'm not that keen on making my notes look super organized and colorful. So as long as I have the information, it's clear for me to understand, it's fine. Although I would say in general, all the classes I've taken, like finishing the piece and understanding how you approach a problem is often a better way to like reading your notes 1,000 times and deriving that formula once by yourself and really thinking it through how you went that way and how you got your final answer is more helpful than just reading your notes again and again. And oftentimes your professor will like, I guess like they will give you a textbook that they refer from, but they don't really follow it. And so the question is, do you read your textbook or not? And when would that be helpful? And I find that if you read everything in a textbook, that's gonna be 1,000,000 hours. Like you're never gonna be able to finish it all. And so I really do recommend if you don't understand the lecture, go to your textbook. And if you do understand it, then it's okay not to read a textbook if you don't have the time. And if your professor is a nice person and a good teacher, they will not be testing you on things that they don't talk about in a lecture, and so that's okay. But overall, that really depends on your class, and that's just how I've really approached it. But I would say, adding on to Kylie, like collaboration is super important. Just in general, learning how other people think about specific problems, that usually helps me a lot with approaching my own problems, because thinking by myself, especially if I miss a key point that other people remember, then that will be a significant time halt in which like I can't finish my assignment really quickly. And so yeah, and another thing I would add is just that connecting with your professor and your TAs is super important, not only because you learn more from the class, but also because these professors and these TAs that you know that you connect with can give you recommendation letters and things like that. And so that will help you boost your future, I don't know, classes, whether that be like internships or research or whatever. So I always think that connecting with professor, go to the office hours, like I mentioned previously, is also super important. All right. And then, so our next question is, what is imposter syndrome and how do I overcome it? And so for those who don't know what an imposter syndrome is it's literally by the name. When you get accepted to a college, you feel like an imposter, like you don't belong there because you feel that you're not good enough to be there, or you just feel like everyone is so much better. And so it's a really terrible feeling. And so, yeah, how do we really overcome that? Or maybe what are some experiences you had with imposter syndrome?
All right. So I feel like something that was interesting about going to college is it was a lot of people who were on a similar kind of standing per se as I was, which was cool, but it's also like, oh, it's a realization like your world kind of opens up a little bit. I never necessarily felt imposter syndrome in my college itself, but more so with extracurricular leadership positions, because I found that in college, age is very much like I don't know, it's just a thing. And like grade as well, like there's not as much like seniority as maybe there is in high school. And so you could be going for similar opportunities as someone who's like 2 years older than you. And I had moments where I was like, I'm not sure if I should be doing this or not. Like, I'm not sure if I've done my time in order to be eligible for this opportunity. But it's really kind of that realization that it is kind of an even playing field. Like, yes, they may have more experience in some areas, but you do too. And you're there for a reason. And it kind of boils down to just saying yes to yourself and going for those opportunities, because there's a reason you got to where you are now, and kind of continuing in that progression and taking advantage of all those opportunities is very important. And I found that's kind of what helped me overcome my feeling of like, I'm not sure if I should be here, but yeah, just kind of going for it. That would be my advice.
Yeah. My experience is a little bit different from Kylie just because I'm going to a private school where the tuition is very expensive. And so the student body is predominantly white and wealthy, which is very different than Branham and very different from me. And so um, how I navigated that mainly is that I've found spaces where it's predominantly people of color and people of mixed socioeconomic statuses. I just feel the most comfortable in those spaces, and so I try to seek those out. But when I have to take a class where it's predominantly white and rich, or I have to be in that sort of space, I try to remember that I deserve to be at Georgetown, because sometimes it feels like I don't when I'm in those type of spaces. So I remember that, you know, I got in because I worked really hard. I'm smart, I'm capable, I can do this. And then I also remember that as an Asian American woman, I'm middle class, I have a unique perspective on life and all of these different topics in these classes. And so by being there, I enrich the conversation and make it a better space just by existing there. And so that's what empowers me when I feel imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch up on like imposter syndrome in general with academics, because I do go to Stanford, and everyone here is like super insane. I've never like won any international competitions, like, or even state ones. And so coming in, like I was ready to be like the bottom of my class and I was gonna be fine with it. And so, but it turns out I still tried, and everyone's super nice. I don't know, like they're really intelligent, really smart, really capable and everything. And they're also super nice about it. And so I find that I'm learning from them instead of like being, I guess, like depressed about me not having done as much in high school as they did. Because when you're in college, you were sort of like starting off with a fresh start. Nobody expects you to know everything. Nobody expects you to have already accomplished a lot. And so you're off on this like start with like a blank paper, literally, in college. And so usually people don't really like ask, what did you do in high school? It's more like, what do you want to do in college instead? And so that's been super helpful. And I guess like something else I would also like to add is that for like, if you are at the top of your class at Branham, you're probably not going to be the top anymore. You're probably going to be the medium or even below. And so that's totally fine too. And so I sort of think of it as like a learning process. If I'm learning and if I'm trying my best to understand, and if I don't get the best result I hope for, like, so what? I try my best and there's no regret. And so I've always like seen it as a learning experience rather than like seeing how much I can accomplish. And going for it that way sort of makes me feel like I'm more surprised about what I end up with. And so that's really cool. And so, for example, like I took this really hard physics mechanics class my freshman fall. The professor is super good and all my classmates are like really cool too. But like I got like a 50% on one of my quizzes, and I think the class average was like a 60% or something. So it's pretty bad. I was like 1 point away from like my professor emailing people because we got such a bad score and what we can do to help and things like that. And so like, I don't know, I didn't really feel specific disappointed because I knew I wasn't going to do well on that quiz. Like I saw the material and I was like, okay, I'm done. But ultimately, like, it was a moment of learning, and I actually was more focused in that class afterwards, and I got really decent score for my final, and my grade was okay. And so yeah, but overall I'd still say that's a really cool experience to have because I never gotten a 50% before, and it's kind of interesting that and so yeah, learning experience. Anyways, okay. And our next question is more on the social life aspect. What is college extracurricular like? What are you involved in?
Alrighty. So I am in Greek life. I'm not sure if anyone's interested in it. I didn't join my first year, but I just joined in my second year because online is so fun and you need all that stuff. But I did find, since Santa Barbara is so big, it is nice to kind of find that niche where you make a large place feel a little bit more homey, smaller, you find your people type of thing. And I happened to find some friends who were in Greek life and very much encouraged me to kind of go for it and see what that was about. And so I have honestly loved that. The people I've met through it are just awesome. And it's really made Santa Barbara feel a lot smaller for me. I mean, it always gives me people, like if I'm ever in like not feeling well, like I've had people in my sorority bring my like get well soon basket. It's just like the things that people like think about. It's kind of like having a family nearby, which is really, really nice. It's definitely not for everyone, but is a very cool thing. If you are interested in like finding a social organization outside of school. They also have ones for pre-professional, pre-law. One of my best friends is in a pre-law fraternity, and they bring guest speakers of like, what is it like to apply to law school? What is it like taking the LSAT? Like, here are some resources and companies, and it creates great networks for that. I know at Santa Barbara med ones are also very, very popular. There's a lot of biology majors there. But it's a great resource to kind of make a big space feel smaller, create a network, build friends, all of that. So I've loved that. Also just getting involved in clubs is great, especially career clubs. I'm hoping to go into the user experience field. So I found a club that focuses on the UX UI kind of field and gives more information on that. Your Office of Student Life is going to be a great place for you to go. Their website, just learning about what organizations do you even have on campus. There's intramural sports, there's clubs, there's Greek life seminar, like you name it. Unlike high school, it's not just kind of clubs. There's a lot of possibility for what you can do. So kind of finding those arenas to make your space feel a lot more personal and intimate is really good. So yeah.
In college, I signed up for a whole bunch of different extracurriculars because Georgetown doesn't have Greek life that's officially endorsed by the university. People socialize and meet people and make friends through clubs. And so we have a club rush where everyone has different booths. And so I found a lot of clubs that way. I got involved in a lot of student activism clubs. And so that's where I met a lot of people of color that had the same values as me. And so that was a great and affirming experience. I also participated in a lot of community service, which helped me to get outside the Georgetown bubble into the community. It was also really fulfilling. Last year I joined a cultural club, the Asian American Student Association. So I was able to meet people who were Asian like me, and that was a really fun experience. And I also participated in theater. My freshman year, I did a musical, but then it got shut down because of COVID. But over Zoom, we've been doing some virtual theater, which has been very interesting, but very fun.
Yeah, I did my first year remotely, so it wasn't very active, although I was able to find an environmental club that was really, I guess, like cozy and warm and so welcoming, and we met every week, and so it was a good time to just like learn about environmental justice and just think about all the different ways in which we can help Stanford become more sustainable. Yeah, and then this summer I'm on campus, so I did orchestra for the first time after a year and a half of no playing with people, and so that was super cool and it's really fun. And like I mentioned in my introduction, I also participated in an entrepreneurship club, and that was super interesting because Stanford is known for its startup culture, and so like it's just very I wouldn't say like very good, but it was just very interesting to see all the people who are like really intensely like passionate about startup and dropping out of college. But it was also really cool to see how like people were so passionate about their project that they're willing to give up their education for it. Yeah. Okay. And our next question is, what is college dorm life like? Since people are just gonna start moving in like soon, like what are some advice we can give to students who are going to a new dorm?
All right. So when I lived in the dorm, I lived in a triple room, which you can imagine is not very large. I think at one point I did the calculation and it was like we had the equivalent of like a 42 like inch square like space. It was not large. It was like the size of a twin bed. It was kind of funny though. So with that said, you don't have lots of space. So pack minimally. I guarantee you do not need to bring your entire closet. But packing like strategically about the things that you'll use recurringly, like clothing racks, like small food items. Like in a dorm, you'll also have like the dining hall, so you don't really need to worry about like as much food stuff. I took like a shoe organizer and made it into a pantry, and like being creative with your space, using things that maybe they weren't intended for that use, like the shoe organizer or using storage ottomans, things like that, to kind of create more space where there may not be some. But also just think like you do not need to bring as much as you think. But one thing I would recommend bringing is a kind of first aid kit situation, because I guarantee you will likely get sick while in the dorm. I remember my first quarter, I got sick all the time because I was in a dorm of like 2,000 people and you're going upstairs and doorknobs and all that. So germs spread very easily, and especially with COVID, that's something to be aware of. But I always had like liquid IV, emergency, Dayquil, whole 9 yards of things just in case something happened, because you never want to be like on your own and thinking, oh crap, what am I going to do? Who do I call? Who's taking care of me? You kind of want to make sure you're prepared for all of those situations, and you're kind of good. Also, learning about transportation from your dorm. My dorm happened to be a mile off campus, so I got very good at biking on the bike trails and through Isla Vista very quickly. Also learning about your bus system. A lot of students get free busing, which is fantastic and a great way to explore kind of the city around you too, if you're interested. But kind of figuring out like what will it entail for me to get from point A to point B in the most effective manner, kind of learning about that. For UCSB too, we are nicely put a rather social college. There are a lot of social gatherings, non-COVID times, to be kind of aware of. A lot of dorms will have quiet hours, and little even study nooks, so you can be there into, I think the latest I was there like 2 a.m. Not too bad. But where you can kind of get away if things can become loud. But normally there will be quiet hours and places to go if you need that, but just being really communicative with your floor mates and roommates about that situation too. With all that being said, living in a dorm was actually really fun. I loved my floor. My RA was fantastic. I was looking back at photos and I have ones of us doing like self-care face mask nights together. And we all did stuff on Halloween together at one point. Like you kind of, that's your first initial point of meeting people. And now I think back to it, and like my suite mate, which a suite mate, you share a bathroom in this specific dorm, became one of my best friends. So it's a great place to kind of socialize and meet those people, because they're all in the same situation as you. They're all just as nervous. They all packed too much stuff. If you don't have something, odds that your like next door neighbor does are high. So it's a good community to kind of help you ease into college and living on your own. But yeah, there's that.
Yeah. Being in a dorm, yeah, it's totally fun. I became really close friends with my roommates and people on my floor, so it was a great time. That being said, sharing a space can be difficult, and it's really important to remember that all of your actions affect everyone else in your dorm. And so with sleeping schedules, figure out if your roommate has like a test the next day, really needs to sleep, maybe don't go and party that night and go to sleep early with them, or, just think about ways in which you can make your roommates' lives easier, communicate your needs, make sure they're communicating theirs. And so you can have a really awesome experience. Also, try not to do everything with your roommates. I think being friends with your roommate is great, but you also want to make, more friends. And so find some space also by yourself, try to balance all of that. Your RA, Kylie mentioned it. It's the person, there's a student that is designated to kind of look after all of the people on your floor, but they're also enforcing the rules of the campus. And so they're there to support you. If you, like, we had mold in our ceiling and they were there to help us like navigate the facilities and get that removed. But then they also, if someone's underage and they have alcohol in their room and they do a room sweep, they can get busted for that. So it's a kind of complex relationship, but I'm sure you'll be fine navigating that. And then since I go to school in DC, packing was, you have to be really strategic. And so if there are things that you can buy in DC, like toiletries, or you can ship them because you're buying them anyway, don't pack them in your suitcase. Only pack the things that, like clothes or things that you can't buy in the location that you're going.
And I just want to add on a little bit about COVID safety. So I guess like it really depends on what you like, but for me, I know like the Delta virus is still pretty prominent. And so I try not to go to big parties, especially if they're all unmasked and people are super close together indoors. And so I stay away from them. But obviously, like, you can also make friends in other ways, not just partying. So I do recommend maybe like not be so active in those, just because there are so many people and you want to minimize your contact with the virus, even though you might be vaccinated and you won't have too much of an effect, but it still would affect like maybe your academic life. You can't really go to classes and have to be quarantined and things like that. And so in general, just try not to get Delta or COVID. And so I suggest like hand sanitizer everywhere. Make sure when you come back to your dorm, I don't know, like throw off your clothes and put on clean ones and things like that. So we want to be as like cautious as we want to be. And hopefully, if that being said, like what Kylie said, maybe less germs will be in dorms and you would get less sick in general. Okay, I do want to be conscious of time. We have 5 minutes left. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them in now and we want to address those first. But if you don't have any specific ones, we will continue. Our next question is on how to find internship research. And the next one is on balancing academics and social life. Are we okay with continuing, or do you have any questions you want to be addressed first? Okay, awesome. So Kylie, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I am on a research project currently with a professor, and in all honesty, finding that opportunity was very much about just going for it and reaching out to the professor. So I took a class last fall about research methods and I loved it. And I told my TA that, and she said, go look at all the research that professors are doing on the department page. Something that I would highly recommend doing just in general before you go to college is, if you happen to know your major, odds are they have a major page with a bunch of information for students, who your faculty is, even the TAs, a bunch of information just pertaining to that department. Read it, learn it, become familiar with it, because it holds a bunch of information. And for me, that information was what these professors were researching. So I read through like 30 different professor like things of what they were doing, and I found a project that sounded really cool. So I emailed them over winter break and said, hey, I just love what you're doing. If you have a need for an RA, I would love to join. I interviewed later, like a few weeks later, and it ended up working out, and I've been on it ever since, and it's been one of the best opportunities. I've met multiple professors, different RAs. I've gotten to train them, work with grad students, all of that. So it really helps open up your network as well. Because once you kind of have your foot in, you can open the door entirely, and it presents a bunch of more opportunities. So if research is something that you're interested in doing, I highly recommend, this is a great time for office hours to come in general or come in hand, because you can get to know your professors. They love to talk about their research. In fact, if you ask them about it, they will strictly talk to you about it for a very long time, and you will be at the forefront of their mind because it's something they're interested and passionate about. And it goes a long way to talk about it. But really just going for those opportunities, and don't say no to yourself before, like, let somebody else say no to you. If you're interested in an opportunity, don't be the one to stop yourself. Like, honestly, just go for it. College is one of those times where you can really explore and take advantage of all those opportunities that are kind of coming at you. Okay, internships. So internship applications are typically going to be in the fall period. And lots of people lost my train of thought, but it can be a really intimidating process. Like, you'll see the easy applies on LinkedIn and things like that. I honestly use LinkedIn as a huge resource for finding internship opportunities, but also filtering it, seeing which alumni from my college are working at these companies, and trying to get kind of that direct connection, seeing if you can find anyone who knows recruiters, things like that. But in terms of the interview process for that, I would definitely say there are some similarities when applying to college as well. You kind of want to really show your story and show your skills through your story, and how that kind of shows your qualifications. Sorry, I'm trying to keep this brief. There's a lot more into that, but just honestly practice interviewing too. Call your friends, your family. I practice interviewing my dad a bunch. Just practice, become comfortable with your story and comfortable about showcasing why you're so awesome through your words. Last, do you want to know about study abroad? If I can see, yes. Okay. So I am studying abroad in Sweden starting in January, and that entire process was kind of really fun. There was a lot of questions like, I don't know, should I do it? How am I going to navigate not knowing how to speak a widget of another language at all, anything like that. But odds are that your college will probably have some sort of system to help you with that process. For the UCs, it's called UC EAP, and it's this team of amazing advisors that are for literally the entire UC system, who help you kind of navigate finding programs based on your major, finding programs based on countries you want to see or skills you want to learn. There's internships. I have a friend interning with the Irish Parliament. I'm kind of taking the general class route, and then there's other people who get to do kind of cultural experiences. So really narrowing in what type of experience you would want to get, and then filtering as such, talking to your advisors, planning far in advance, and it kind of helps. They'll help you through the entire process. But yeah, it's all very fun. Highly recommend it all.
Yeah, and if you have any further questions, I'm sure Kylie would love to talk to you about it. I will also be brief. So this summer, I got an opportunity to do research with the material science department. It's a program, the research undergraduate experience. Yes, I think so. And so there will be a ton of emails that will be sending your way if you check, like, if you join like the, I guess, like engineering mailing list or anything like that. Your academic advisor will probably send them all out to, and so just check them out. And so for this specific program, what they do is they would list all the positions and what they do, and they encourage you to talk to the postdocs or the PhD students who is in charge of that. And so it's really quick. Just send an email to the professor or to the PhD student that you're interested in it and you want to talk more about it. And so with that interest, after you talk to them initially, you can also follow up with another conversation. Maybe you read a paper, you watched a video of the professor lecturing about his or her research. And so you can add a follow-up email. I realize now that I'm in the program, this like following up really showed my interest, and my mentor was super happy that I was interested And so I got in because like I was able to demonstrate that. And so if you were interested in a research like what Kaya said, just send an informal email to the professor. They love talking about it. It doesn't hurt. Worst case scenario, the professor doesn't respond, which you can also send an email after a month or 2 weeks-ish. And so go for it. Okay, and final question is, how do I balance academics and social life?
Okay, so what I would say about this is, yes, college is a time for you to focus on academics, kind of hone in your skills on all of that. But another thing to keep in mind is this is really one of the first opportunities that you're likely going to be living on your own, a lot more independent. It's a huge time of self-discovery, kind of what your needs are as a person, what it's like to be on your own, make new friends, be in a new place, whether that be like an hour from your house or across the country, whatever that may entail. And that can be kind of an intimidating and new thing to process. And it's honestly a huge time to learn skills that are outside of the classroom, like conflict management with roommates or all sorts of fun stuff like that. So I strongly recommend, like, something that really saved me in my balance was finding my little rituals that were great for me. So I would go on walks every night with my best friend. That way we were, one, getting away from school and our laptops, and also just like getting outside, being social, kind of stepping away from everything, even just like having a self-care night where you kind of say no to some of the responsibilities that you may need to do. Taking power naps, sleep, please sleep. That's a huge thing of balance, at least in my case, because I'm not sure if you guys did that in high school, you didn't sleep, but very important. But really taking time for yourself, prioritizing yourself, evaluating what you need in that moment, whether it is focusing and finishing that academic like problems that you're doing or something along those lines, or just saying no and stepping away, because you have a lot more than just academics to focus on. Unlike in high school where, yes, there's academic and extracurriculars, but you have a lot more life stuff in college to also be aware of and attend to.
Yeah, and learning how to navigate all of those different responsibilities. Calendaring is great for that. I had a lot of extracurriculars. I had to schedule in when I'm going to eat, when I'm going to do self-care, when I'm going to sleep. And so I would take time out of my week to just sit down with my calendar and write down, all the different things I had to do, figure out my schedule so that I would be able to get all that mental health and get everything in order. Also, if you really are having a really rough time mentally, I had a family member who passed away last semester, and I have other friends who have had like huge mental health crises and they can't physically do their homework. And so in that case, reach out to your professors and other staff members. Oftentimes they're there to support you, and they will 100% like try to figure out a way to change assignments or do things to make your life easier. And so just reach out if you need help.
And I just want to reiterate the importance of sleep. Sometimes just sleeping for 1 more hour will save you like a lot more hours of doing something unproductively. So sleep is super important. And I got a lot more sleep in college and in high school. And that has been like literally changing my life and how productive I am and how much I'm learning. Yeah, and so this pretty much concludes our, webinar session. We want to offer you some key takeaways before you leave, and feel free if you have any more questions, we can stay behind a little bit to answer them. And so for key takeaways, number 1, don't be afraid to ask. Whether it be counselors, professors, alums, or upperclassmen, these people are here for you because you go to their school and they're pretty much obligated to help you. And so don't be afraid to ask, especially just maybe like being friends with an upperclassman and just asking them about their experience is so much more helpful than maybe just reading the website. And so I highly recommend just getting to know an upperclassman or two. And number 2, don't say no to yourself before you do. Like what Kylie said, like there are so many opportunities just go for it and see if you can get out of it. And so, yeah. And so I remember my mentor who said to me like, well, what's the worst that can happen? If it's nothing worse, then just go for it. And number 3, take care of your mental and physical health. And just remember that it's okay to say no to different people, that you are not free, that you need to take care of yourself. Don't stress yourself too thin, because if you do more than you can, you might be less productive and actually get less out of it. And finally, make sure you are having fun. You're in college only once. And so YOLO, take that experience and actually enjoy it. Yeah. Anyways, hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to send it. If not, thank you so much for coming. We do have a feedback form we would like you to fill out. I'm gonna send it in the chat right now. If you can take like 2 minutes to fill it out, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Do any of you have any questions for us? If not, you can log off. Thank you so much.